Hello everyone, and welcome to How Can Institutions Ensure that Learners Are Equipped with the Key Data Skills that Employers in South Africa Currently Require. This is a Times Higher Education Roundtable in partnership with Coursera. My name is Alistair Lawrence. I'm the Special Projects Editor at THE, and I'd like to thank you all for joining today's discussion. Also to add that an on-demand version of this roundtable and a summary article of its key findings will be published on the Times Higher Education website post-event, should you wish to revisit this content or share it with any colleagues. I'd like to begin by noting that in the period of upheaval and change for universities that we're currently experiencing, attaining and educating skilled, employable students is top of the agenda in many countries, South Africa and beyond. So today, we'd like to ask the panel of university leaders a number of questions that will encourage knowledge sharing and examples of best practice that can help address key strategic challenges for universities throughout the country. So I'd like to begin by asking the panel how they have found how courses and curricula can be blended to effectively increase student engagement. I was wondering if anyone would like to, David, perhaps you'd like to start us off by, and also if you could please tell us your job title and your institution, that'd be really great. Thank you.
Right, appreciate that. My name is David Kabwa from the University of Pretoria, two-term SRC president, as well as National General Council member of the South African Union of Students. Recently completed those terms, also former Prime Minister, Commonwealth Youth Parliament. Right, so in relation to our context within the University of Pretoria, its emphasis is placed on ensuring that students get a very early start. So there's an entire separate program that's a sort of optional curricula with a pedagogy designed to really accommodate a student's pace for students that are taking it, on an optional basis. It's called the Ready for Work program, which a student can finish anywhere between 4 to 6 weeks. And essentially you get a certificate indicating that you have undergone the module and have been trained in terms of workplace readiness. There is also what we call the Tux Entrepreneurship and Innovation Platform. And that really has a more practical element engaged into it, where essentially students with entrepreneurial ideas and innovative ideas come forward and they engage the relevant department, and they are then taught the further skills that they need in order to implement it. And then lastly, speaking from a student perspective, we have a series of structures all the way from societies known as UP Consulting to more social enterprise-based entrepreneurship, such as what you might see with enactors really focusing on ensuring that entrepreneurship reaches the community. The one theme that's consistent in all of these platforms is the notion of experiential learning. We need to get beyond a point where our approach and even our pedagogy is simply text-based. They say the greatest teacher is experience. And it has been my experience and that of many students that the more hands-on approach, you do something once, and you were able to implement it the next time. But more than anything, that you were able to demonstrate that I have completed it, and here I can easily show you the skills that I have gained from it. So that's a little bit more about what's been happening within our particular context.
Okay, I just had a quick follow-up question about that, if you don't mind, David. I mean, how long did it take to build these programs and implement them?
So within the University of Pretoria context, they've been there for over a decade at this point. What's most important is that they're continually updated. I couldn't tell you exactly when they were started. I found them at the University of Pretoria, but I've been very grateful to be part of the process of growing them. So I think a level of fluidity is required to reflect the changes that we see in our contemporary society.
And has the shift to online in recent months changed the program a lot in that period?
I would say yes. We see within our socioeconomic situation in South Africa that the lockdown has greatly influenced students from disadvantaged backgrounds. Most institutions of higher learning started laptop projects where institutions would send laptops to students all across the country and also procure data for these students on various networks. And oftentimes you'll find that you can send a student a laptop, you can send a student data, but some students find themselves in areas where there is absolutely no coverage at all. So what we've introduced in that context is essentially telephonic assistance, where a call center has been set up. And as a student, you can simply request what we call a please call me, and you get a please call and you're assisted telephonically. The unfortunate fact is that this process does take a lot longer than students being able to do it themselves, but the major emphasis is being placed on no student left behind. So to answer your question directly, we have seen that the move online has allowed many more students to accelerate, but for students from disadvantaged areas, it has caused things to slow down quite significantly.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for those insights. Francis, if we come to you next, so then Francis, if we come to
with Francis now.
Yeah, I did. I tried my best to make it
first.
clear. Yes, Francis, if you don't mind.
Should we have ladies first, or?
No, you go. You were first.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Thanks very much, Alistair. I just wanted to make sure that we get it right. So I'm Francis with an I, Francis Peterson. I'm the Vice Chancellor at the University of the Free State, and I want to say that, you know, we often talk about and we'll continue to talk about COVID, and the COVID pandemic have really accelerated the remote teaching, and learning, but also the online, because there's obviously a huge difference between the two. And specifically in our institution, but I think in most other institutions, there have been teaching and learning strategies before COVID that actually talk about a blended learning. But COVID really have just accelerated that strategy. So at the University of the Free State, we've got a teaching and learning strategy that is blended. It actually spread over a continuum from face-to-face to online. And then remote teaching and learning is in between, but we're also looking at open and distance learning. We're looking at virtual reality. We're looking at other blended forms, flipped classrooms, and all of those. So that is the one strategy that one point that I just want to bring across. The second one is probably talking more around the, maybe there's somebody that should mute themselves at the background. There is someone, the other point is the curriculum. Now, to what extent does the curriculum informs exactly what is needed, not only from different sectors of the economy, but also from the community perspective, because I do believe that if we only provide skills that is applicable and absorbed by the economy, you also lose the role that the university in general should be playing, and that is to create adaptable thinkers, people that could adapt in different situations. But for that, you also need data-related skills. So what we've got is we have established a series of academic advisory boards across academic departments in institutions that bring people from the outside sector, the economy, but also from government and the communities. And they not only critique, but they also start to say these and these things are the skills that are needed. Why is it not in the curriculum? And then we've taken it a step further. We said, well, come and work with us and start to co-create some of that curriculum content. So the co-creation is not only a relationship building, collaboration, but it's actually co-creation that is happening. And that is expanding. But the third one is to say, to what extent do you have structures in the university that really enable the data skills, the blended learning, the digitalization aspect. And we've got a Center for Teaching and Learning that is exactly doing that, supporting both students and staff. And then we also have a center that we recently established, which we call the Interdisciplinary Center for Digital Futures, which effectively also start, because data has that potential of bringing different disciplines together across the silo boundaries as what we have seen in the past. And this center actually does that. But what it also do, it feeds that back into the different faculties and also obviously the curriculum. And that culminated in a digitalization strategy for the whole institution. Not only teaching and learning, it's also on research, it's on engaged scholarship, it's how we operate as an institution. And the data, the concept of data and the concept of digital futures becomes infused in the DNA of the institution. And like David from UP, University of Pretoria, we also have a foundation course in our first year. That is not optional, it's actually compulsory for all our first years. And in that course, that foundation course, we have embedded the whole issue of digitalization, the skills. Data is a key component of that. And hopefully we will extract that back into our graduate attributes for our graduates to leave. But I think it's about for me, the strategy, the systems, the co-creation, collaboration, relationship, and then obviously make it part and parcel of how you operate as an institution. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis. You mentioned the critiques and the collaborations with outside sectors. Are there any that have been particularly useful for you?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I want to isolate one specific example, and that is, it's unfortunately, it is in the computer science area. So we've got companies representatives on these advisory boards. They have challenged our academics. Our academics, first of all, obviously pull back because they think that the academics own the academy and own the curriculum. And I said, well, you do own it, but if an advisor from outside critique or give advice, then you must, and you don't take it up, you must explain to that advisor why you haven't taken it up. We're not forcing you to take it up. And that means I want the academic to reflect. And in that culminated in a course, well, in courses and additional curriculum content that is now presented in a co-created fashion by a representative from these computer related companies or electronic companies and computer skills. And suddenly the employability started to be enhanced because the advisors that are sitting in that part of the economy can extract the skill directly, but there's also the academic that now say, well, goodness, knowledge doesn't only belong to the university. Knowledge is also out there. And wow, I can use that knowledge and we can start to work together. So that's an absolutely great example. And one last example, which is just the opposite, is in our Department of Hebrew. We also have an advisory board in Hebrew, Department of Hebrew. And the advisory board there is playing the role of taking the academic out of their comfort zone, because I want the academic to reflect, to be critical on him or herself. And that advisory board, in fact, when we talk about advisory boards in our institution, the head of Hebrew always stands up and say, well, how wonderful it was and is to have an advisory board that adds so tremendous value. So those are just two extreme examples, but I think it's useful in this discussion.
Great, thank you very much. We'll try and return to that later because I had a couple other questions about graduates or students from very in-demand sectors such as computer science, but I'm just mindful we've got other people who'd like to make a couple of points. Francis with an E, sorry, from Coursera, if you could just tell us how this dovetails with the work that you're doing with universities and how much it resonates.
Oh no, really interesting, thank you. Hi everyone, my name is Francis. I'm a partnerships director at Coursera for South Africa. I'm based in London, but I have South Africa. So I've been to South Africa and I'm looking for an invite back. So feel free to extend that to me. So nice to meet you all. I wanted to just follow up with a couple of things actually that Francis and David both mentioned about the Ready for Work. I know about that's happening at UP. I'd love to know, because I hear a lot about is that the standalone programs focused on employability are obviously really important, and they address the issue we have in South Africa. But these standalone programs, the concern I've had, well, others have had about them, is that they detract people's learning hours away from core programs, and that actually the curriculum integration of these emerging skills around 4IR need to be embedded into curriculums, and which I think probably loops into what Francis was saying about how we can work better with industry. I think some of the things that we've definitely seen from South Africa, from leadership across the universities, is lack of data. So we've got our core programs, we work really well with industry, but then we take that insight and we say, let's co-create, which is great, but who is going to co-create this content? And if it is going to be blended learning that we're moving and transitioning to, there's a huge amount of resource and cost involved in bringing in these insights from industry, creating this blended content. And we've definitely seen in South Africa, I'm going to say over half of the universities in South Africa have a blended learning hybrid model planned or in place in some capacity, and they're looking to increase it. I'd love to hear just an open question. Sorry, Alice, if that's okay for me to take away from what you do. How do you get that divide right between embedding into core programs versus standalone employability programs? And is there a concern of having people going off and doing programs to the side?
Loretta, do you want to go first?
So, hi everyone. I will respond, Francis, because that was actually in a way what I wanted to touch on. So my name is Loretta Perez. For those that you may not know me, I was until around about March the Deputy Vice Chancellor at UCT, responsible for student affairs, as well as for transformation and social responsiveness. And it's interesting, I mean, we have this conversation, Francis, around standalone versus, embedding it into the core curricula, around issues of social responsiveness. And so we had long debates about what is the best model, and ultimately came to the point where we recognize that it's very hard to prescribe a specific model, because different courses and different course curricula may lend themselves to an approach where you can say, this is a prerequisite for the course, or you can actually integrate it into the curriculum itself. So I don't think that you're going to have an sort of an either or approach necessarily. And the other point that I wanted to make, Alistair, was around the important aspect of not forgetting academics in all of this. I think some of the hard lessons we've learned is, as an executive, that we have a wonderful strategy, and a strategy looks very good on paper. But of course, ultimately, we need both our students and our staff to actually embrace a strategy for it to work. And I think this is one of the hard lessons that we actually learned with with an online approach to teaching and learning, because I think for many years, other universities was actually ahead of UCT because of a reluctance to actually take online on board. And so when we had to shift to remote teaching, that kind of upskilling almost of our academic staff had to happen almost overnight, and we actually had to do kind of emergency remote teaching skills for our academic staff, and I think that that's one of the conversations that we need to talk about, is how do we equip our academic staff to actually engage with data themselves, for instance? So that was the other interesting learning from the lockdown is all of a sudden we have emergency remote teaching. We're trying to engage with students because, as David said, you have some of our students who literally have no access to Wi-Fi, to connectivity. So even whilst we provided them with data, with laptops, you know, they may simply be in a really remote area where there's no electricity. And I mean, that is very much part of the reality of South Africa. And so we had to find other means and ways of connecting with students, WhatsApp messages, please call me, as David has also indicated. And what we asked academics to do is begin to actually track the extent to which students are participating in their courses, to actually track the levels of engagement that students have in their course. I mean, these are all elements of data that we have not trained our academics to engage with. So we haven't trained our academics. Well, I'm speaking for UCT. I mean, we sort of had to catch up, but we haven't really trained our academics to engage with digital platforms, and we haven't really trained our academics to engage with data. And so I think that's a very important starting point, is that if we want to make our learners, our students, data ready, we need to make our academic staff data ready as well.
Thank you very much, Loretta. Sean, if we can come to you next, please. I wonder if you could add and tell us a little bit about how your institution has responded to some of the issues raised, such as creating feedback loops with external parties to refine course curriculum, and also making sure your staff as well as your students are supported.
Thanks. Thanks, Alistair, and good afternoon, colleagues. So firstly, a disclaimer, I won't claim to know everything that's happening in the university. Our DVC research passed this invite over to me, so I'm the chair of information systems, but let me try to reflect, and I won't repeat because I think a lot of the strategies, as Francis has described and other colleagues, are pretty much the same in terms of response to COVID and how we've reacted. I mean, at the University of the Western Cape, you know, the institutional strategy does very much have, among many pillars of strategic focus, that of the university in the digital era, which in itself then plays itself out in our tactical and operational interventions, including teaching and learning. And so, like the other universities, we also have centers to support teaching and learning with lots of interventions, etc. I just want to make a couple of broad comments, Alistair, before I respond specifically about the matter of feedback loops and interventions with others. But just on this notion of data and data ready. So I think perhaps for all of us, and Loretta, I think the challenges you're describing around staff and to a certain extent students might prevail across many of the institutions. And I don't know if it's, I don't think it's particularly unique to your institution. But I just want to talk about this notion, because this concept of fourth industrial revolution gets used so often and so loosely, and of which then we're talking today about the concept of data. You know, it's almost as if we might be creating a little bit of a hype. Now, let me explain myself. My view is that data and data skills has been inherent across, you know, many areas of program and academic training for some time. What has happened in the last years, let's call it the last decade, the pervasiveness of having a network prevail everywhere has brought data into sharp focus. People suddenly realize that we now have much easier access to data. Data has always been around. It's just that now much of it is now in electronic format, and much of it is more easily available. So if we think of the average academic program, somebody training in the field of pharmacology versus somebody training in the field of marketing, somewhere inherent in what they have to do is the notion of data. But what has changed is that now the average workplace is also grappling with because the truth is many organizations are also grappling with how to transform themselves into this digital era. Now, from an academic perspective, then how do we respond to this? Now, from curriculum development perspectives, there's always been a kind of a tripartite foci in how we deal with curriculum, because there's always what we call foundational competencies for individuals. And of course, people might know that in our qualifications framework, we have what we call cross-field outcomes. And many of the cross-field outcomes, if we go and examine them in the South African qualification framework, actually already point towards things that relate to data skills. So the framework is already there in place. So in most curriculum, you'll have individual competencies, and then you have a domain of practice set of competencies, and which to date, depending on the field, might or might not have been, nurturing around data. And then you have the particular domain or specific skill area competencies. So in my field, information systems, there's a particular skill. So the question then would be for all our programs, to what level do we actually start tweaking that curriculum so that the individual and domain practice competencies start to bring the notion of data into a more elevated level and so that it can be better focused? Because what the average employer, and I just want to make a point about the notion of work readiness, and unless it's a professional training program, let's say like in medicine, not every academic training program leads itself to somebody jumping straight into the water and being able to swim. So the average workplace is expecting the graduate, the young graduate, to understand the notion of data, to understand how to access the data, to understand how to organize and use it for whatever decision making that is peculiar to that practice domain. And I think what needs to happen, in addition to the foundational digital literacy, which I think Francis says is at UFS, we also have at first year compulsory kind of foundational digital literacy for everybody. That all the curriculum training needs to start then building on that, in the notion of data has always been there, but electronic based data, and how in that particular academic training program that electronic data actually is paramount. And I think just with a bit of rethinking and refocusing, people might begin to realize, data has always been there. It's just that we haven't really been focusing on it in the way in which it's currently elevated. Thanks, Alistair. I'm going to stop there. I think I might have forgotten about.
That's all right. No. I actually, you raised a couple of interesting points, and I did have a follow-up question, which was, you talk about how data can be applicable to different disciplines and people studying in different fields. Do you think that a greater amount of interdisciplinary study and perhaps project work between students from different disciplines can help people understand data better? Sure, Martin.
So the answer, there's both a pragmatic perspective and in other words, what's possible and what we would like. So, I often find, let's take a research perspective. Ideally, most research problems require an interdisciplinary approach, and bringing different disciplines to come together, because real life problems are multidisciplinary. And the challenge for the average university is how it actually begins to realize interdisciplinary programs. And I think you are right that being able to, in the course of an academic program, have different disciplines come together is a more holistic experience for a student. So I would support that. That might lead for better understanding of how data is used and played by the in the real world. I think it's a difficulty to bring about in tangible terms a true interdisciplinary program.
Okay, thank you very much. Francis, if we come to you next, please. So you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Alistair. I just probably want to just pick up on two issues that both Francis and Loretta raised earlier. The one is the concept of standalone versus embedded. I certainly believe that an embedded approach for me is a more appropriate approach, because maybe my background is an engineer. I like systems, but I do think that you get a better understanding rather than standalone, because standalone, if you don't cite it through examples, how you feed it back into, then it's just going to be you're always going to be seen as a separate entity. So our approaches at the University of the Free State is surely a much more embedded approach, an integrated approach. So that is just a comment, and if there's more questions from Francis on that, I can respond to it. The second one is in relation to the familiarity of data on both the student body as well as the staff cohort. And I think what really works for us at the university is that about 5 or 6 years ago, we were part of a series of universities in South Africa that engages with Georgia State University in the United States, funded under the Kresge Foundation, where one of the foci was student success. How do we improve student success? And in the pre-discussions between Francis and Loretta, you did talk about the readiness of students coming into the system. So it was more about how do we understand fully what are those parameters and drivers to ensure that student success, not only access, but also success, is credible. And the University of the Free State, as part of that group, focused on that specifically from a data analytics perspective. So we looked at data analytics to drive student success in that group of about 5 universities with Georgia State. And I must say that had brought the academics to own the concept of data and what the value of data could be in the form of data analytics. So when we had to move into emergency teaching and learning and remote teaching and learning, we immediately, in the first week after the mid-March, that Center for Teaching and Learning developed hashtag University of the Free State Teach On for our academics and hashtag University of the Free State Learn On from our students, which we brought that data understanding and data analytics fully into play. And we trained during that period up until say middle of last year, over 1,000 academics alone to own and to say, well, we partner with this process, and hence our momentum for our teaching and learning strategy, which have got a very strong blended component, is very strong because it's been generated. So I think, as Loretta have said, different institutions are at different stages of evolving. I think most of all, even probably all the 26 universities, public universities in South Africa, has got a blended way of approaching. It's just where we are in our development of uptake. So yeah, I thought, Alistair, I just wanted to add those 2 comments in response to both Francis and Loretta.
Great, thank you very much, Francis. David, I can see you've got your hand raised. Can you perhaps tell us a little bit about the challenges that persist around these issues at the University of Pretoria?
Right, do appreciate that. Just quickly before I touch on the challenges, completely agree with the comments that have been made, but more so want to emphasize the notion of students learning both within the curriculum and outside of the curriculum. Holistic development is really something that's very important. But touching on some of the challenges that we still experience within our own context is moving more towards ensuring a more integrated transdisciplinary research. And we have a new campus called the Future Africa Campus, which is working in very close association with the South African Innovation Hub, as well as the Department of Higher Education and Training. And this particular campus, the main focus that we have there is transdisciplinary research. What we're finding is that transdisciplinary research seems to be more applicable within a postgraduate framing. So in this context, you'll find that oftentimes different departments, scholars, and students at a postgraduate level often engage in matters that are cross-disciplinary. One of the challenges is looking at how to bring this into an undergraduate setting where the focus is on ensuring that students are equipped first with the knowledge of their discipline before bringing in matters within other disciplines as well. With that being said, another important consideration that we do give is kind of the notion of espousing community. We have a very community-based approach. We refer to ourselves as the UP community that does things in the UP way. Therefore, our approach to problem solving has always been, how can we ensure that what we're doing does not only become effective in silos, but is able to assist the institution as a whole. And that is why when we say no student left behind, we ensure that academics are a part of that process, professional staff, support staff as well. And we've seen that that has very much helped, particularly within a hybrid space. We refer to our blended learning as hybrid learning, which was well in motion before COVID hit us. So that transition was not so much difficult. It was ensuring that we are able to equip our students and staff to deal with what is happening within the country as a whole. So all in all, I'd say operating within a community framing has been very effective in allowing us to address a lot of the challenges that we face.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Francis from Coursera, can you tell us a little bit about, from a supplier point of view, how are people who use your platform, how is their approach to interdisciplinary curricula and international collaboration changing? I mean, is it a lot of barriers have been removed in the past 18 months?
Yeah, one thing I'll say, I will come back to that question, but in terms of just touching on a previous question or a point, the staff side has been something we've seen huge amounts of uplift. Are you hearing double of me, or is it someone else?
A bit of an echo, but that's that. Yeah.
Is it me? Oh no, I think it's gone. Yeah, we're seeing huge amounts of interest across Africa, but actually particularly in South Africa. We have partnerships with WITS and also with NWU, which are actually just around staff. So just staff development, and actually that includes administrative staff development too, which is fascinating. Making the business, more agile, helping people to think in an entrepreneurial way, help them find other funding opportunities, so which has been really fascinating. And I think one of the things we've seen, I mentioned before, was that very much that blended transition because of COVID. I absolutely agree with Francis on the acceleration. We, as a company, went from 46 million learners in April 2020. This doesn't sound like I'm making this up, but 46 million in April 2020 to 92 million as of last week. And that is a real general. People were uncertain about their jobs. They knew a lot about automation that was going to accelerate it because of COVID. A lot of uncertainty. People were at home. They wanted to invest more in their personal development. So we've got a huge amount of data. Actually, if it's okay, Alistair, do you mind if I share something?
Please go ahead.
Thought people might find useful to see. Just our data on South Africa at the moment on the platform. This is of yesterday. I can't keep up actually, unfortunately, with these slides. It's impossible. But just to give you a little bit of insight. Yeah, so at the moment, as of yesterday, 1.174 million people in South Africa are learning on our platform. Fascinatingly, 193,000 of those people declare themselves as students. We don't know where they're from, so don't ask me. But 193,000 people in South Africa declare themselves as students learning on the platform. And that's really around three key areas: business, tech, and surprise, surprise, data. Data is the number one area. And actually, from the data we have globally as a company, that's my global sign, South Africa is obviously in an emerging space when it comes to those data skills. So it's not surprising that we see a huge amount of interest in people looking for it. I think the opportunity for universities is, why are 193,000 students coming to Coursera? is that because these data courses are not available, they're not accessible within core programs. And I think there's a really great opportunity for institutions to say, how can we bring some of these emerging skills into our core programs? And I think there's still a lot of opportunity to work really well with industry, contextualize subjects for South Africa, for Africa, but there's also a huge amount of duplication, right, across institutions. And that's, I think, a huge concern that we see. I think there was a report a while ago that said of technical skills, of a technical skill, they have a shelf life of 2-3 years. Yet we're creating a huge amount of content in those spaces, but it dates, and which is frightening. You know, it's terrifying to think the work that you might have put in 3 years ago is actually already gone, and we've now moved on. So again, how do we find ways to leverage insights and data that, you know, for example, we have, and it already exists out there, we've discussed it, to say, you know, what are the emerging skills that people need within a country? You know, what are the skills needed in finance in South Africa? What are the skills needed in manufacturing? And then find ways to bring that in and use the time that you have with academics to really drill in, you know, to those concepts. So you've seen this introduction on data science. Let's discuss that for South Africa. How can we make that relevant to us? What does that mean for us? What challenges do we have around that? And I think these are areas that lots of university leaders in South Africa are, you know, starting to think about. Why are we creating so much when it dates so fast? And can we use the time that we have, you know, to contextualize those concepts? But I'd love to hear people's thoughts and whether you knew the numbers that you see on the screen, if you were aware of those. Sorry, I didn't even answer your question, I don't think. So apologies. All right. I made my own question.
That's okay. No. I mean, it was just, I mean, if we did have time, it was just to talk about how, you know, how online platforms are changing the nature of interdisciplinary approaches and what patterns you've seen emerging.
Yeah. And we've seen a lot of opportunities where we've worked. You know, we have a contract at the moment, a partnership in Morocco, which was instigated by the Ministry of Education for 15 universities. They have a new bachelor system. It's a 4-year program, and they want to bring in, you know, the most emerging skills into that. They did not want these institutions all off creating the same thing across an entire country. So they wanted to have this element of collaboration across a country where the universities still had their own strengths and opportunities to attract learners. So there's a huge amount of collaboration opportunities available, and I think COVID's expedited that as well.
Okay, great, thank you. To respond to the question you raised, Francis, if you'd like to go first, and then Sean after that, please.
Yeah. So maybe just to add what Francis has been saying is it's probably the notion of my view always, and we try to do that, try to create that sort of thinking also within the university, is that for me the economy is an ecosystem, and that ecosystem means that every part in that ecosystem has got value to offer, and each part of that ecosystem has got knowledge, and I think that's the sort of approach that we're following, and therefore the whole issue of knowledge sits only at the university is something that I'm also trying to see, well, how can we break that notion down? There's still people thinking that way. So in terms of engaging with the likes of Google, of Microsoft, IBM, just purely on data, but also a whole series of small and medium enterprise companies that has been set up through venture capital, because there's a lot of innovation happen and we have a lot of data. Those are the people that we're also engaging with. So micro-credentialing is in fact a key part of that context. So Google is offering sort of certain courses in data together with certain universities, not only here in South Africa, but also elsewhere. And I think as the way of looking at the ecosystem, you then say, well, how can the ecosystem become interconnected? And just on the concept of data, but obviously the value of translational research is a no-brainer in that model, because what then happens is that you start to co-create, you get internships, the students work together with the companies, data repositories generated, you play with the data, and I think that's probably where we should try to expand more, and not saying that the Coursera's of this world hasn't got a role to play. I think they've got a fundamental role to play, but I see them as part of that ecosystem. So it's not either or. It is how can we understand that? But to do that, you need to understand the sectors of the ecosystem very clearly. Otherwise, you either duplicate or you get the value proposition totally wrong. So I thought I just want to make that point, Alistair, in the context of what Francis has said.
Okay, thank you. No, it does speak to a wider challenge that it's clearly ongoing. Sean, if we can come to you next, and then Loretta after that, please.
Thanks, Alistair. So the thing is, I think to answer the question, we also have to differentiate the different roles and how training and capacitation is different for the different roles. So I saw on Francis Quirk's slide, data. What was it? Data scientist. What was on the bottom right?
Data scientist, yeah.
Yeah, so the thing is, I'd agree. There's definitely a shortage of data scientists, and many universities, including our own, are creating programs and have created programs to deal with it. And so let's just talk just for a moment on those who are the so-called data scientists. And right now, you can see, if you just look across the university, in many areas, the issue of data science has become far more paramount than it was before because of our ability to use it. So like in astronomy and in the biotechs, etc., you find far more pronunciation of data and data science work happening there. And those types of fields will continue to grow. Then let's just talk about the world of practice. Everybody can't be a data scientist, and we won't be able to produce enough data scientists to be in every single field. But what we can do is to have a sufficient number of data scientists to be the backbone of the world at large, who are the people who have the right skills and techniques to be able to develop, let's just say, the innate technical and algorithmic type approaches that are needed to be able to get big data, to find out how do we actually process it? How do we increase the rate at which it's produced, for example, right? So the tech and mathematical modeling and statistical type knowledge. So those are your data scientists, and we only have the capacity to be able to train so much of them. Then, with that layer being the backbone, and this is a point I was making early on when I spoke, within our training and even outside, because I'll be keen to know, Francis, in that number you put out, what is the kind of duration of courses? Are they short courses, medium, longer term courses, etc.? There's certainly a need for in the practitioner type industry, for people to come and to be trained on how to be the users. Because at the end of the day, if you're not a data scientist, I want to equip you to be able to use the data intelligibly for whatever your core work function is. And actually, if we come back, I mentioned cross-field outcomes previously. It is already stated: collect, analyze, organize, and critically evaluate information. Right? Use science and technology effectively, identify and solve problems. So these are things we strive to do in all fields. But if we could have shorter courses and while we might try to do it inside of let's say a university curriculum, and a student can have some degree of preparedness, but as he or she gets more work experience, we should have shorter courses and master classes that helps people use the tools that have been developed by data scientists to be more productive in the workplace. And so we have to attend to training for data skills on both sides of the fence. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So and you do touch on a point about lifelong learning that if we've got time, I'll try and get to as well. Loretta, how do you think there is enough awareness of the type of the broader ecosystem that Francis and Sean have spoken about?
So I wanted to come in on that ecosystem. I think part of that ecosystem is, of course, the progression that students take from being learners at school to coming into the university. And that's where, and we had that conversation before we officially started with the panel. And Francis and I were talking about the fact that that's actually where the gap is that it sits within our education system. And just briefly wearing the hat of somebody who has a learner who's going to school, who's at a fairly well-resourced school. And even at this fairly well-resourced school, the digital skills that they are learning is quite limited. You know, I'm looking at the environment in which we are, and here, you know, I'm paying quite a lot of money in school fees, and I'm, you know, I'm not quite happy about the level of preparedness of my child, but he's in a well-resourced school where they learn a little bit of data handling, etc. But now you compare it to the majority of schools in South Africa, and actually there's nothing going on. So Francis with an E, I was wondering, you know, to what extent are some of these people that participate in your course teachers? Because I think that's we need to perhaps invest more in a kind of collaboration between teachers and the kind of programs that we have at universities, because yes, we have in our first year experience program at UCT, for example, a digital learning skills program, but wouldn't it be wonderful if those people can somehow connect and collaborate with teachers, and both from both ends try and bridge the gap? Because the notion of university readiness is part of the government curricula, the CAPS curricula, but how it actually gets taught, that speaks to the inequalities that sits within our schooling system. And I think that there may be a role, you know, for Coursera to play in equipping grade 12 teachers to get students to actually be better prepared to get into university when it comes to data and digital skills.
If I
Go ahead.
Interrupt David. Yeah, no, absolutely. And we actually have many projects which are just directed at, you know, digital teaching skills as well as data skills for teachers, staff members, aimed at K-12 all the way through to higher ed. There's a huge amount of information there, and I think there's a huge opportunity. And I think a lot of the time when I and lots of people who work at Coursera speak to university to talk a lot about students, you know, student upskilling and employment, but actually there's a huge number of staff that haven't had as much as an investment as, you know, the university makes in the student side. So there's a big opportunity to support. I know, I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but I know it's in the thousands on the platform that declare themselves as staff members, teachers in South Africa that are learning on the platform well. And around that, there are key things around personal development and digital teaching skills. So that's a huge trending area on the platform.
Okay, thank you, Francis. David, have you experienced similar problems with the pipeline of students into the university, or people perhaps not being as aware of the broader ecosystem of skills and knowledge that need to be taught?
Yes, I do think it is a problem that we have experienced within South Africa as a whole. As mentioned earlier, the social disparities that we do experience as a nation. What we've done to remedy the situation, in addition to the programs I had mentioned in the very beginning of this discussion, we have UPO, which is University of Pretoria Orientation, a compulsory module where students learn everything from how to use the library to how to make use of the digital platforms that we have. And then obviously your basics, we have another compulsory module called AIM that deals with that. But more than that, I want to kind of tie in, you know, kind of the digital preparedness with the notion of ecosystem and, you know, collaborative efforts. We have a project called Moja Gabedi, and that's essentially coming from our community engagement department, where we've taken over a plot of land and are essentially teaching students and staff, as well as members of the community, how to develop crops and farming and things of that nature. Some students sell the crops that they make. Some students use it to pay off tuition and so forth. There are members of the community who come in and make use of the space also. And what we're seeing there as well is obviously there's the practical element and skills and so forth, but we also see that students are learning how the fourth industrial revolution also applies to a non-technological context such as that. You have to go back, you have to record the data, you have to keep up with the crops that you're using. With our digital, we have a digital librarian named Libby. Libby is the most popular staff member within the institution. And the caretakers of Libby allow opportunities for students within the engineering department to also come and to learn about programming and to learn about robotics. And that's a very practical way to ensure that students are picking up on the digital skills, but also obviously the staff members in the library are picking up those skills as well. So as we mentioned, the constant learning, the fluidity, and ensuring that this learning does not operate in silos, and by that the interdisciplinary nature, you might find that those of us who might come from an engineering background are very much problem-solving orientated, and we just want to get in, find out what's broken, and find out how to fix it. And those from a humanities background would take a step back and perhaps say, let's look at the bigger picture. And you need both voices and digital increase, but also ensure as it develops and ensure that no one is left behind. So I think that's a good point of departure in that regard.
Okay, great. Thank you, David. We've got 2 or 3 minutes left. I just wanted to ask the panel if there was one particular challenge that they think is that they could improve upon, or a change that they would like to make over the course of the next academic year or going forward that they think would really help them embed all of the things that we've spoken about today. Francis, you look like you're considering something. Go ahead.
Right.
No, sorry, Francis with an I. So I knew it was.
we just can't get it right. Eh?
I know you're next to each other on my screen, so it's very confusing. Anyway, please carry on.
Yeah, I think if the blended learning concept is a concept that is absorbed within our institution. I think also in many sectors. So I don't think we're going to go back. It is just to make sure that the execution of that is done in a proper way, because the area where we certainly as a university still got a challenge is the quality assurance component that comes with the blended learning component of the continuum of delivery, and I do think that's a space that we need to understand, and maybe the likes of Coursera, we need to talk to them a little bit more, because if we don't get it right, the credibility of that strategy is going to be questioned by both, in fact, by everybody in the ecosystem. I've already got people from private sector, industry and commerce saying, Francis, can you comment on the quality of the graduates that will come out of the COVID-19 pandemic? I mean, they've graduated. So it actually talks about the quality assurance part. So, Alistair, that would be for me the key part in terms of making sure that the strategy is effectively embedded and is working.
Thank you. And Francis from Coursera, likewise, is there a commonality between a particular strategic goal that you see as common across all universities when they look to the future now?
I mean, it's blended and online, and I think a lot more is going to be around the data. And just like Francis said, how do we prove to employers that our learners have the right skills, that they are employable? How do we benchmark? How do we make decisions based on data? And I think that's an area that lots of institutions have data, but they can do more with it. So I think there's opportunities there to act more on that at that front.
Okay, great. Well, that just about brings us up to time. So I'd like to thank everyone for taking part today. It's been really interesting hearing all of your insights. It's been great having such a diverse mix of institutions and job titles who I think told us a lot about what's going across South Africa. And Francis, thank you again for Coursera's involvement and for helping to facilitate the discussion. As I said, there will be an online on-demand version of this recording if you'd like to revisit it or share it with colleagues. There's also going to be a summary article for those of you who are time poor and don't have a chance to go through a whole hour's worth of content over again. And that will be published on the Times Higher website, and we will send you the links to those in due course. So thank you all very much for taking part. I hope you've enjoyed the discussion, and I hope that we can engage with you at future THE events. Goodbye.